So it's just conscious of time, we just thought we'd do the last bit of next steps and wrapping up and opportunities for final wider questions.
Okay, well thank you very much for taking part in the four discussions on our four papers that we put out there. As I said before, the living documents, our research project question papers, are meant to be informed by your views and others' views and develop in time, and they will be reviewed regularly. I think the idea is annually, and the first one that's coming up is the teaching one, which is the most popular one over there. And also, just to point out that the department is still going to be commissioning research, but the idea is that it's much more informed and in tune with discussions that we have like this and elsewhere, and much more in tune with existing research and research that's being planned. So, if you want to offer any more thoughts than you have just in that 3-5 minutes on any of the points from today, then we've got our mailbox there, we're on Twitter, Facebook, so if any of you have a blog or newsletters or anything like that, Facebook, Twitter feeds, then please do highlight our papers, because the more that we get people involved, the more that we can tell people about our research approaches, the better they can be and better informed. And you can access all of the papers on the gov.uk website. So please do that. And Stuart, you just going to say?
Yeah, just a final thing. If there were anyone who's particularly interested in kind of what the department's doing in relation to evidence-based teaching explicitly, or if you've got some really good examples of how evidence is informed practice in your schools, we'd be really keen to hear from you. We've got a set of people who kind of talk to regularly, and I've put the mailbox in there, and we try and keep, I guess, which are kind of key advocates up to date. So if you think you're in that category, then please do get in touch with us. I think the final thing we want to say was, does anyone have any kind of wider questions on DBT, our approach, the research priorities that you want us to, anything beyond that that would be helpful to answer now in the last 50 minutes? Go on.
Can I just ask about the current research projects that you're funding, which is more on the policy side than the classroom practice side? They're relying very, very heavily on case studies, and I think you're putting quite a lot of money into doing glorified case studies from which you can't really analyse issues. So I'm seeing some assertions which I think actually are about the researchers' opinions and views rather than real evidence, and once they come out in one report they get recycled. I've just seen a report that references a previous report which actually there is no evidence in, it is an assertion, and I'm really concerned that that is it's being called research because it is.
Okay, well I guess our ideal is to have a mixed method approach to research, so we hope to have quantitative alongside qualitative research, but sometimes there may be reasons why that can't have that quantitative element to it. I don't know about the precise one that you're referring to. Have a chat afterwards, but we, as a researcher, I would definitely agree with your sentiment that we shouldn't take too much, we shouldn't rely too much upon just qualitative evidence, and that it does need to be more contextualised and combined with quantitative evidence.
Another further thing to add, possibly because I'm not an analyst, I think the department recognises we ain't perfect yet, both in terms of research, how we work with researchers, and internally in terms of how well the policy people understand what the relevant areas. But we are working on it, and we've got kind of plans in place. Any other thoughts? We don't want to.
Me?
Yeah. Sorry, I could say the bit, it just felt a bit rude.
Just seeing that grid of all those things, areas, I mean, I think a more helpful approach would be for you to just generate research questions for people to think about.
Well, that grid are the titles of the research papers which include.
The thing is, are you not just sort of, I don't know, trying to fulfil a creative need, if you see what I mean? It's about,
are you saying that you find it more helpful to engage with them if you could just skip to the question bit?
not really, it's just when I first read all that stuff that came out, I just thought, well, it's just empty. Do you see what I mean? It was, everything came out, it was There's no sort of bone that's just this is the area. I mean, surely there must be sort of issues that the department is concerned about regarding per pupil premium.
I think the approach is to try and explain what I can in the documents, is try and explain what our understanding of the context is and what we're doing in that area, where we think there's evidence and there are kind of strong points in the evidence base where we know something, and then where therefore the questions are. It may be that that's not perfect, and if there's specific things on it, particularly if we're would be happy to have a kind of follow-up conversation. But there's one more down there. Philip, go on.
One of the things that can get in the way of mixed methods and tip you, I guess, into case studies is timescales. And of course, the hardest thing for governments to have research informed policy is timescales, because ministers are always in a hurry. And you're at an interesting point in the life cycle of the government. So it would be interesting just to know about what's the time cycle. Are you thinking about commissioning research in a year, the last year, or have you got space for spanning the changing government in your research commissioning?
I think you can look at it in two ways. I think there is a speed immediacy. There always is. There is every point in a government life cycle. The other thing to say is I think we recently visited from Kane from Harvard in America, and his view was now is a great time to get people to commit to do longer term research, because you're not going to find anything out particularly for next spring. So, but there are some things that people are really interested in. So if you're going to get people to do it, now might be not bad time. I think the civil servant answer review is actually we're doing a bit of both of those. So if you look at the research use round we work with the EF on, the timescales for that are quite long actually before we know kind of impacts on attainment. And ministers are quite comfortable that it will take 3 years to know whether or not something has an impact. And I think they're prepared to kind of accept that we need a bit of a range. So I think that's quite positive personally.
I think I vaguely remember a Ben Goldacre radio programme about research and education, and one of his worries was that ministers wouldn't want their flagship education policy debunked by research, which may take a year or two to complete, by which time the policy will be well implemented and publicised, and so there might actually be a bit of a conflict there of interest.
I think we've got to be very open. There is always a kind of conflict between the speed of how you implement something and how you want to evaluate it. And there's always compromises. I think ministers are pretty open, in general, but this in particular, pretty open to the fact that evidence is important and that it can say good things or bad things about what you're doing, and there's always a risk when you commit to rigorous evaluation it doesn't give you the answer you want. But I think they've shown that they're pretty open to change. I think there's a few examples where they have changed policy direction. Some of it will always be contested, and sometimes ministers will always decide that actually some of the evidence points in one direction, but it's not a technocracy, or whatever that word is, but actually you should take into account kind of political and other drivers. And I think sometimes the department always help ministers explain that balanced openly as effectively as it might. I think that's one of the areas we could work on a bit better. But sometimes people will choose to do things that are not supported by evidence. And
I think
class size is a
educational maintenance allowance was cited as one of these policies that wasn't really supported by evidence in terms of the impact that it was hoped to have, but it was politically incredibly unpopular to scrap that.
Another thing to add is that our ministers are fully cited on newspapers and are signed up to them. So they are standing behind this approach of identifying what the priority questions are.
Well, if I could build on the last point slightly, I don't quite got to the nub of it, and surely this is whether the DFE should be setting the research agenda. I was aware of the research priority papers because they were brought to my attention by a piece by Stephen Gorrod at Durham. He is an online comment piece called The Conversation. He wrote on those, and he said that, well, it is obviously very good that we're looking for research in education, and it's a very positive step forward. He points out, so on the academies, the accountability ones, he says, well, the questions are like, how do academies work rather than do they work. And I think there's examples in here as well. For example, how are school leaders using their freedom? Does the military ethos work? As opposed to, is it the right thing to be doing? There's lots of other questions. It's not that research isn't a good thing, but the question surely is over whether the DfE should be setting the agenda on that, and that's surely quite concerning.
Are you saying we are setting the agenda or we're not?
I'm saying that it's very difficult to produce objective, politically neutral research agenda, and when you look through the papers you produced, it's clearly a good thing that we're looking for evidence, but it's questionable whether the DfE should be creating the questions, because there is a clear bias in terms of how they look at things, and I don't think they're necessarily going to unearth the evidence, such as do the academies work, but asking how they work.
I think you ask, there's some political point. I don't think we're saying that these research priorities are the kind of last word in the priorities for the sector. This is our attempt to be open and engaged, and clearly people will have different views about what they think is important, the sort of questions we'll be asking. That will inevitably be informed by the programme of government of the day. That is,
but you say inevitably. I don't think it is inevitable.
It is if DfE are doing it. It's the point I'm making.
Yeah.
I think there's plenty of room for other people to do it.
I'm saying again, even this, I'd say it's a very good consultation process. But ultimately, any views that you get are going to be put through that lens of what is government policy. Whereas you could, for instance, have you could put money aside for an independent body which decides on these questions rather than doing it in the department. And that's exactly my point here.
I think we could probably have a kind of an extended conversation about it. I think we have, this government has put money into a relatively independent organisation to try and have a kind of more objective look at the evidence base, which is the EF. They're able to do that a bit differently. I think the DfE, you've got to kind of see it as a kind of process for the DfE. Before we have kind of engaged in this process, we basically decided what we want to do in kind of research areas and do it ourselves. This is trying to open that process up to get a few more views and to make that a bit more balanced and rounded. It isn't the pure risk model that you described, but I'm just not sure at this point with where the kind of government is that's tenable. It doesn't stop anyone, other organisations having lists of relevant research questions or whatever the kind of right phrases are. I know there are other people that are interested in kind of trying to support that debate at that.
Just disclosure here, it is the military ethos question that's come up here. I know people can, I don't object to the idea of military in schools and things, but it says here, I quote, military ethos organisations will nonetheless be making tangible differences to pupils' education. They will be addressing behaviour difficulties and instilling values of teamwork, discipline, providing structure, organisation boundaries, developing pupils' self-esteem and confidence. This doesn't appear to be a question, it appears to be the decision's already been made. And I'm not going to personally go here. The way it reads to me, looking at things, and I'm very much behind educational research, it just stuck right out straight away as it makes to be written. When we know what we're going to look for, and we look for the evidence to back that up. And that's how I read it.
That teachers and teaching paper is the first one to be reviewed, so we're really happy to have your feedback about that paper and about the questions.
The questions later on seemed fine, but that was a block, no citations on there at all. It just read like somebody has done.
I think one of the challenges is the kind of policy context bit will always look a bit sort of self-fulfilling, because that's how government talks about its policy agenda. Self-fulfilling is not quite the right word, but I'm trying to be kind of open and pragmatic. There is always a kind of a pitch that government believes what it's doing is the right thing, as right as it's doing it. So there might be a bit of tone, but I think we should definitely reflect on the point you made. I think it's important challenge. So I think the main behind it is.
I was just going to say, is there an irony that we talked about this the last 2 years, really, in the past, been looking at evidence, it's been gold and at the same time we need to move to school-based initial teacher training, which may pose a very serious threat to university departments who are another source of independent research. I just wondered if you thought there was a bit of an irony there, that you shift potentially away from university research into education, which is independent, through a policy decision,